In this State of the Sitcom episode, we bring it back to the UK for a spot of tea and a beloved British classic, Blackadder.
That it be, that it be.
Yes, it is, not that it be.
And we're joined by the hosts of Bygones Podcast for a journey through time, turnips, and tittering.
And Bob.
Judgecast.
Bloody hell, I haven't got the bloody thing on yet.
Oh.
Right, go.
Oh, there we go. Judgecast.
Hello and welcome to Judgecast with myself, Joe Bowden, and this guy,
Jay Taylor.
This episode will be continuing our State of the Sitcom miniseries to discuss a show covering several hundred years, a host of British comedy legends, and more turnips than you can shake a sticky the stick insect at. Blackadder!
Hey.
We do not advocate shaking stick insects, by the way. Joining us are the two wonderful hosts of Bygones Podcast, Eleanor and Laura Jane Parker.
Hello!
Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about your podcast?
Sure. So, Bygones Podcast is an Ally McBeal rewatch podcast. So we take each episode in turn, break it down, and figure out whether it still stands up with 2019 eyes. And it's actually quite interesting because I think it was hugely a popular show at the time in the late 90s. It was a massive kind of zeitgeisty show.
Mm-hmm.
But these days when you watch it back,
Yes,
there's a little problem.
So we go episode to episode and dissect scene by scene to see what's still good and what's still not good.
Yes. And we were big fans of the show originally, so it's kind of like these days where it's like love to hate type
It is.
thing.
It's completely love
funny.
hate.
Yeah.
Like there are times I'm just like and then there's times where I'm like laughing.
Yeah.
It's like there are still great like comic performances on that show that still stand up today.
But yeah, it's we love taking shows and breaking them apart. So we were really pleased when you asked us to come on here.
Yes.
Absolutely. And yeah, before we get to today's, I find it really interesting, like this type of stuff, because until I saw like your podcast come around, I forgot how big Ally McBeal was.
It was
like,
huge.
It was massive.
I kept on thinking it was far more recent than it was, like the fact that it's like 20 years ago.
No, 20 years, yeah.
It's mad, isn't it?
It's and she after the first season, she was on like the front cover of Time magazine on a story like is feminism dead? Like it was just massive. Everyone was watching it.
Yeah.
But also like in terms of like cultural impact, I'm pretty sure that it was one of the first meme kind of show, like the dancing baby. I remember that being shared in the early days of like MSN Messenger and stuff.
For sure.
Just spent a half an hour downloading the clip.
Yeah.
From like LimeWire or something.
Yeah, exactly. It takes like you're there like waiting for it to like load frame for frame. So it definitely was like we said that was like one of the first sort of realizations we came to on rewatching it. We were like, hang on a minute, did Ally McBeal invent the GIF?
There are so many moments that are just like that's like someone's just thrown in a GIF here.
Yeah, exactly.
It was,
especially in the first series.
Yeah.
We've just moved on to season 2 this year. So and what we've noticed even in the first few episodes is they've really dialed down the GIF limits. There are still some in there, but way less, which is doing havoc with my Twitter feed because I used to like sort of screen grab them and use them as GIFs on Twitter, but I've got less and less opportunity to do that now. So, but yeah,
still got the great one of Ally straddling George's face.
Yeah, that's a GIF moment. Yeah,
classic moment.
But yeah,
I'd be really interested to ask you this: what do you term it as in genre? Because I remember it as kind of being alongside your like LA Laws and stuff like that in terms of programming, but it was much more of a comedy.
I'd say it's a dramedy.
So that was the word that ended up being thrown around, dramedy. Yeah, and it's funny because in the first season that we covered last year, they do some crossover episodes with another of the writer David E. Kelly's shows. He wrote a bunch of shows around the same time. Like he was really prolific.
Of law shows.
and all law
Yeah.
based in
There was so many law
And
shows
they
at that
They did a couple of crossover episodes with another of his shows called The Practice, which we weren't familiar with really at all. And we picked up, they did one crossover episode in the Ally McBeal universe in Ally McBeal, and then the second part of it was aired as part of the Practice universe in their kind of season. And I think it was the idea was to try and cross-pollinate like the audiences to get Ally. The Practice was the more established show, so they were trying to get more audience over to Ally. And when we, for the podcast, went and visited we got hold of a copy of this Practice version of the crossover, we were like expecting it to be a sort of very similar sort of show. And it's like completely different. Like the tone is hilarious because
it's melodramatic.
We thought it would be like the serious version of Ally McBeal, but it was, and I think it was trying to be, but it was completely over the top. Yeah, it was just like this really cheesy Diagnosis Murder version.
It reminded me of Diagnosis Murder.
A law show. It was so funny. And we just couldn't stop laughing because we were like, I can't believe this was like
this is mad.
What people watched.
I mean, how jarring must that have been, though, to like watch as an Ally McBeal fan and be like, where the hell am I?
It was a wild ride.
It was really funny. Really funny.
Really funny, yeah.
That's
really good.
So weird. But today, unfortunately, it's not about Ally. Although I could, now that I've started thinking about it, I could then generally talk about it quite.
It's
a bit.
it's weird how strongly I remember it. Like I think I might have been one of those people who used to videotape it and rewatch episodes.
Oh, when you used to videotape stuff, those were the days. You can just catch up.
Make sure it's on long play so you can record hours.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, we should have you on our show. Like, you can come and discuss an episode with us, and then you can sort of.
We'd love that. Yeah.
I don't know about later seasons for me. I don't know. I can't remember how long
the Robert Downey Jr. years.
Oh, is that?
Yeah, that's season 4. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right before you went to jail.
It's really weird.
Yes.
But today we are talking, or you have chosen.
Yes.
Blackadder.
Yes.
The classic. I've been singing that all morning as well. Written by the same guy who wrote the QI theme.
Yes, that's very true.
Really?
Yeah, I knew that. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
You can't really think about Blackadder without thinking of the theme tune, to be honest, can you?
No.
It just sort of
Exactly.
comes out.
All the different versions.
I feel like we should start rolling out like a trivia point score type thing, like QI.
Yeah.
Like, really? That's quite interesting. Yeah. So how come you chose Blackadder? What was?
Well, we had a brief discussion, and Blackadder, for me, I don't know about you, Eleanor, but it stood out because I didn't watch it when it was first aired because I wasn't born for most of it. But I don't know if you guys are in the same boat, but they did a rerun of all the series when I was I was about 12, 13, on the BBC. They just started re-showing them. They just decided to put them out again in order. So that was my first exposure to Blackadder, and I remember being allowed to, because it was on just sort of, I don't know, 9:30, and I remember being allowed to stay up especially late because my dad was like, oh, you'll like this, you're allowed to stay up. And so I watched that, and I remember I was, the friends that I had in school at that point, I didn't have many friends, but I had a couple, and they'd been watching it too, and we all just thought it was the best thing we'd seen, for some reason, even though we knew it was dated and knew it was like from the 80s. It really enamoured by it. And I went so far as to buy, there was a book that got released around the same time of all the scripts.
Yes, my brother had that.
Yeah, and I got that for Christmas, I think, one year, and I just bloody loved it, and I was a bit obsessed with it, really.
It was through you that I came to know Blackadder, so which I think is something that happens a lot with younger siblings with their older siblings. Their older siblings will get them into whatever they're interested in. And I just remember,
I'm here, you must like this.
Well, do you remember we used to walk home from school, and sometimes you would stop and you would read something to me, and when you got the when you got the Blackadder script book, we were reenacting Blackadder on the hill on the
I literally forgot that.
Who got to be Baldric?
That book was like a massive hardback book.
Yeah, I know.
Was I
carried it
lugging it around?
Yeah, you were.
I have no memory of this. This is
it
hilarious.
was very funny.
What a terrible
it definitely was like just one of the first sitcoms, like adult sitcoms that
we were exposed to.
Yeah, got into.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It just hit, and I think there is something about that kind of between 10 and 15 years old when you see something like this, which is it's actually got a lot of kind of juvenile comedy in it, like the whole Baldrick things and stuff. But then you also feel a little bit like you're learning, and it's a little bit naughty, it's a little bit lewd, it's a little bit
adult, quite rude to each other. Yeah,
and it's that new type of wit that's very acerbic and a lot of put downs. And I think,
for sure.
Yeah, I think I hadn't seen that. I don't know. Maybe I'd seen Fawlty Towers, and that has an element of it, but it's a bit less
See, we didn't
nuanced.
I didn't watch it around that age because I just assumed I wouldn't be allowed to because all my friends who really loved it, and I knew a lot of the quotes. The same with Monty Python as well. Actually, I knew a lot of the quotes, and they all sounded a little bit like rude and mean, and I just thought, I don't think I'm going to be allowed to. I'm not even going to try.
I think my dad was like, oh yeah, you could watch this, because I think he obviously knew it from the first time round and was like, you can stay up to watch this will be good. And it's interesting how you compare it to something like Fawlty Towers, which I think we had seen. It's that similar.
It's definitely in that tradition, isn't it?
Yeah. But I feel like 80s comedy, if you sort of track the history of how comedy, like there's something that was just more edgy about the 80s, more subversive about it, exactly. It was more kind of Channel 4 versus BBC, even though I know it was on the BBC. But do you know what I mean? It was just pushing the envelope that bit more, and it just felt like cooler.
Yeah.
Do
It
you know
was
what I mean?
that moment when the anti-establishment comedians were getting on.
Yeah.
So you had Jennifer Saunders, Dawn French and Jennifer Saunders. You had the kind of the not 9 o'clock news and stuff, and a lot of this is from that same punky element.
The young ones as well, and then Bottom.
for sure.
I think Bottom was actually a bit later, wasn't
Bottom was a little bit later.
Yeah.
Well, that was I guess from what I've read about it, that was a big reaction in terms of that generation of comedies, like reaction against the massive success of Monty Python and John Cleese and all those legends of comedy, being like, how do we make our own mark this generation?
How do we get in?
Do it differently. I think that was that had a massive impact on how they approached it. But you can tell that it's from the same stable, but they're trying to do their own thing.
It's like it's like like a family tree. Like there's the granddad, and then it's the next generation.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it was definitely a rebellion. I know that several people in that sort of our parents' generation would be like, "Oh, I don't get it. I don't like that," because they had such a big reverence, a big fandom of the the more traditional comedy. So yeah, that whole rebellion thing actually came through, even passed down to generations, which was actually made it fun. So yeah, I wouldn't watch it at home because I just assumed I wasn't allowed to. But I would watch it with my friends sometimes at their houses.
You weren't a rebellious child then.
That came later. But I think also because I was watching random episodes here and there, I really struggled to follow what the hell was going on in terms of the timeline, because I would watch one from season 3, then one from season 1, then one from season 4, and I was just like, what the fuck is this show? And so it wasn't until I think we were in our early 20s when we were like, right, Jay was like, I want to watch Blackadder again, and I was like, oh, I might actually finally get my head around this. And we watched the whole thing.
I think when you're flipping between sort of seasons, between the seasons, because they're all different time periods, that's massively confusing. But also season 1 is just, and we'll probably dig into this, but it's just so different from all of the other seasons.
It's not even the same show.
Not found its feet in season 1.
Yeah, so I can imagine if you're flipping between them, you're like, what the hell is going on with this show?
But I remember doing that when we rewatched it in our 20s, and I was doing that thing that so many people do with so many shows, of going, no, just stick with it. Because in season 1, it's not very funny, and it's not really... It's so reliant on such a sprawling idea and all these locations and everything, and you just kind of... You don't get a sense of anyone, really.
You shouldn't watch it. It shouldn't really be your starting point.
No.
Because you're not going to get it. I'm amazed actually it got commissioned.
I think so I've read a book recently. It wasn't for this podcast, I just happened to be reading it. But it's a book called The True History of the Blackadder. It's a true history of the Blackadder, the unadulterated tale of the creation of a comedy legend. And if you're interested in the history of Blackadder, it's really interesting because it's this guy who's, I think he did a biography. It's not really a biography because it's a show, but it's like he did a digging into of his previous book was I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue. So he's obviously a massive fan of like British comedy, and he interviews all the people to do with the show, so the actors and the people behind the scenes of Blackadder, and just sort of lays it out in terms of how the show came about, like where all of these people got involved with it and why, and like tracks it all the way through to the end. And I'm just at the end of where I've not finished it yet because it's huge, but I'm just at the end of the timeline in terms of season 3. Like they're just doing that at the moment. But in terms of how season 1 came to be, I think it was a combination, from what I could tell from this book anyway, it was a combination of the fact that Rowan had like this really growing comedy profile. Like he'd been doing lots of comedy on BBC and, like you say, Not the 9 o'clock news and that kind of stuff, and they wanted to find a show for him. And John what's his face, the writer, what's the name of him, John Lloyd, that's it, the producer, he'd been like looking to do something, and he kind of knew of Rowan, and basically I think they threw too much money at it. Season 1 had a massive budget.
All the extras and it's crazy.
And all the scenes are shot on location, and it was just massively ambitious for what it was trying to do. And I think that was its downfall in a way, because they were like, oh, let's do these epic, like sweeping shots of Edmund riding on a horse, and it's like, and I think at the end of that they weren't even sure, because it hadn't been a massive success. They weren't even sure if they'd even get season 2 commissioned. But I think they fought for it, from what I can remember from reading about it. And I think because it hadn't been a massive success, the budget was massively reduced, and that meant they had to go back to basics and be like, right, what was the heart of this show? What makes it work? And actually, it's the characters, and it's just focused on the characters and their writing. And that's when it started.
Often,
to find its
like
feet.
Limitations are the things that
exactly.
make something good. If you have unlimitless resources, it's often like a really
sprawling mess.
Because people get carried away with themselves.
Exactly.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
It really seems to suit it, of just like every season from then on. Pretty much two locations. Like season 2 is just Blackadder's house and Queen's throne room. You get a couple of other shots, but
you strip it right back.
Yeah, it just makes it funny because you just have someone walking into that room, and it's just suddenly, like, you know, in Blackadder's flat, it's so tiny that when Queenie arrives and stuff, it's just it's a joke in itself.
Yes, exactly.
Even the Queen's throne room is fucking tiny.
But you don't need it to be massive.
No,
like,
you get the idea.
You get the idea. You don't need anything more than that. Yeah.
Because
it's almost like it's just bare stone, isn't it? And like with a throne in it. That's about it.
And I love how they really embrace the cheapness after that. With like, they knew the door. Like I remember the outtakes on one of the DVDs, and Tony Robinson consistently not being able to close doors because they just keep. And so then they almost
like
embrace
cardboard.
it with but then they almost embrace it with Flash Art, because he just starts bashing like the sets down. And it really lends itself to just going, it's a cheap show now, and we're going to make fun of it. You know, like I just think it's
exactly.
Thatcher's Britain, budgets were cut.
It's almost like that. It reminds me a bit of theatre, in that obviously theatre you don't get all the lavish. I mean, obviously you can have really elaborate set design, but you don't get the luxury of being able to recreate something exactly as it would be to be realistic. So you have to then rely on the performance and the writing and the script to kind of sell what it is that you're showing, and the sets are almost kind of just supporting characters as opposed to the main thing.
Like hints of what this is. Like
that's all you need.
You rely on the audience imagination to like fill in the blanks.
Yeah.
Like traditional Doctor Who is like it's cheap, it's cheerful, and that's what fans embraced about
it.
Now it's got super budgets.
Yeah, exactly.
And I still enjoy it. So,
but I mean, like, yeah, I think you're exactly right of like relying on the characters, and when you go back through it and you just look at the cast list and just go, this is all of like the top cream of the crop.
Cream of the crop.
Yeah.
You just go, I think I've seen them on Comic Relief sometime.
Oh, for sure. I mean, they were all involved in Comic Relief because obviously Richard Curtis is involved. But it's like the who's who of 80s comedy at that time. Yeah, exactly. It's brilliant.
And they've gone on to shape so much of comedy since then. Like, you think, like, it's weird to think that this is Richard Curtis. Is his first TV show? I think his first hit, maybe. Yeah, and he goes on to do like Love Actually. You've got Ben Elton, who's like famed novelist and done all sorts of things.
Yeah,
yeah. And then you've got obviously Rowan Atkinson, who's a fucking powerhouse of famous. I think it's like biggest TV show in the world of all time.
Yeah,
with Mr. Bean. And Mr. Bean is such a massive departure from Blackadder, it's insane.
See, I always, because I knew of Mr. Bean before Blackadder, so it was funny to go back, because I've never been a Mr. Bean fan, because I'm just not a massive, like, I sometimes like physical comedy, but it's just not my jam. Do you know what I mean? It's just not my favourite type of comedy. I'm much more someone who loves sort of wit and like clever linguistic type humour. And so when I was introduced, I was sort of a bit hesitant to watch Blackadder at first, because I was a bit like, oh, the Mr. Bean guy. But then Dad was like, no,
you don't understand.
And then when I watched I think I didn't watch the first. No, I did watch the first series first, and I enjoyed it, but I was a bit like,
because he is kind of Mr. Beanish in the first.
Oh,
he's a lot more of like a simpering
dweeb
fool in the first season, and Baldrick's the clever one. Yeah. And it's interesting they switched that dynamic, and obviously it really works.
That, yeah.
But in season 2, because the season 1 I watched and I was like, yeah, this is all right, but I'm really just watching it because I get to stay up late, fine. And then when it went into like season 2, that was when obviously I got really hooked. And also when I realised that Rowan Atkinson's hot, man. Like, he's really hot.
He is. Those tights.
I'm sorry, I have never heard that sentence before in my life.
I'm not the only one that thinks so.
No,
I doubt it. I just haven't heard anyone say it.
Weirdly, Mum being like, when season 1 was on and before we got to season 2, I was being like, I think I said something about how like unattractive or like not hot like Blackadder was in season 1, and Mum was like, wait till you get to season 2, and then just like
glow up.
The distance. And then I was like, what are you talking about? And then when I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, that beard, like that.
Wait till you see the
beard. Yeah.
What's the cod piece called? Is it the? He gets that massive cod piece in the second.
Yeah, the cod piece. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, that's probably what she was dreaming of.
It is that, and again, I think I'm not going to say a lot of it's down to luck. I think it's a really amazing, talented group, but just that switch of Baldrick to
the dynamic,
yeah. And then, as you say, like it's a bit like what happened with a lot of people watching Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. This Jim Carrey, who had just been pratfalls and faces.
Yes.
And I think actually giving someone in Rowan Atkins is a very physical comedian. If you look at stage shows, a lot of it is, kind of the Invisible Man, all this stuff that he was doing.
Yeah.
And then just giving him real dialogue and real characterization and the way that it grows. So in season 2, he's a little bit mean, but actually he's kind of looking out for people. Then, it grows so much in season 3 because of his situation as, one of the he's not in a high position anymore.
And then in
season 4, it's just perfect position of all of that satire and acerbic wit just coming together in this perfect. I just think, I think season 4 is the best, but we can debate that.
Oh yeah, that's the conversation. Which is the best one?
Yeah, which is the best season? I don't know if you want to go into that now, but we definitely have opinions.
I've laid my cards on the table.
Let's go there. So we've got season 1, which is what is the actual era called?
It's like Richard and Henry, just before the Tudors.
Like medieval.
Medieval, isn't it?
General
it's
medieval.
Like King Richard.
That's very vague.
Yeah.
It's basically just before. So
post Dark
Ages, because of what he does, Richard ends up surviving, and so you don't ever have the 2 children locked in a tower.
Yes.
In a tower. So it changes history at that point. And that's,
it's quite Forrest Gump, isn't it? Before Forrest Gump.
It is
Like, it's like, oh, if Blackadder wasn't there, then history could have been very different. You know what I mean?
He saved the world.
We don't have the dictionary anymore because of Blackadder.
Exactly.
So we've got that one. Then we've got the
Elizabethan
court.
Yeah.
And we've got the Prince Regent.
Yeah.
Prince Regent, yeah.
And then we've got the First World War. Just laying it out for anyone who's not seen the series in full, who's listening.
No, that's a good idea.
Yes,
Recap those. So yeah, what's your favourite?
I think Blackadder Goes Forth has all of the quality things that have grown over those things. So the wit, the humour, but everyone's so. Like the characters, so you get all those nods coming back. So Flash comes back. Melchett is just the best Melchett yet. So he's been brilliant in the previous one. It's just, that whole season, and then like possibly the best joke in British TV ever, which was an accident because he was actually called something else. But calling him Captain Darling,
It's so good.
it's
don't
Darling.
Yeah, it's so good.
Every time it happens, it just makes me such a clever joke. And so I just think everything about season 4, and then for me, and we'll go into this probably a bit later, but that ending.
Oh, yeah, beautiful.
You can't talk about Blackadder without talking about the ending. But I think for me, I love season 4, don't get me wrong, and I totally get why it's a lot of people's favourites, but I actually have a very slight preference for season 3. And the reason for that is, I think the Prince Regent is one of my favourite characters that Hugh Laurie's ever done. He's just his most ridiculous, and I know he's a bit like that in the character in season 4, but it's just because he's the prince and the power dynamic is different. And Blackadder's having to like suffer this intense fool not gladly. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just like so funny to me. But also because the script and the humour is so rooted in wit. And that kind of linguistic kind of gymnastics that I love. And it just really tickles my funny bone like nothing else. Like I absolutely love season 3.
Just the episode titles are already like
so clever.
puns
like
and
Nob
jokes.
And Nobility, like Sense and Sensibility. Like it's all just like a riff on
so
Austen.
clever,
So clever.
Yeah. I think mine was... See, for a long time, my favourite was season 2.
Oh, because
of Queenie.
Because of Queenie,
Miranda Richardson is so funny
She's
as
brilliant.
Queenie. And I think I just loved that performance so much. But then I think I came to have like a greater appreciation of season 3.
Okay.
So now I feel like, but I just can't choose between the 2, 3 and 4. I just can't. They're so good.
You're like, it's like choosing my favourite child.
I know, it's too hard. It's just, like I feel like you get Miranda Richardson being amazing in season 2. You got Hugh Laurie being amazing in season 3, and like season 4, like you say, all the reasons for like
everything kind of
just
hit its stride.
Stephen Fry in season 4 is so much fun. Like, it's so hard. It's so hard to
Ellen is noping out of the decision.
I am.
I've just been trying to work it out. I don't know. And I think it is the 4th one for me as well, because it's the one I know, like the era that I know more about just through like history lessons and stuff like that. So I just understood a lot more of the slightly more clever, witty jokes and stuff like that. And it's also got that real emotional core that really grabs you. And I just really emote with it. I don't know. I think, but at the same time, I've always felt really sorry for Baldrick. And I feel like as every season goes on, he gets a worse deal. So part of me is like, I kind of want to go for an early season just because of poor Baldrick.
Well, I don't feel too sorry for Baldrick, even though I know it's not the same universe, but I feel like Tony Robinson resurrected like season 1 Baldrick when he went on to do Maid Marian and the Merry Men, and he played the Sheriff of Nottingham. Because when I watched, and I loved that show.
That was a great show.
Not least because of the theme tune, which I'm not going to sing.
Such a good song.
The Sheriff of Nottingham character is basically Baldrick season 1 reincarnated. It's like, I'm evil, I'm slightly subversive, and it's just like you can see where he's drawing on for that.
Yeah.
So I don't feel too sorry for Baldrick because Tony Robinson kind of resurrected him secretly, like reincarnated him.
That's a good point, and that actually makes me feel a lot better. So we were sort of doing some, pre-talking about all this and kind of like working out what is it about Blackadder that's so enduring, and we were talking about this whole idea of like, should they have carried it on? Like, should there be more? And we suddenly realised that like the premise itself is just really clever, and they work in isolation as seasons.
Yes.
So you can almost just do an anthology of them, and you could do it with a different cast. A different cast. So we were thinking like, what is it? What is that mix? And we were trying to like, it's basically kind of, as you said earlier, if they focused on the characters, so that kind of made it more about like it's a relationship comedy kind of thing. It's all about these key people in different situations and how their social, economic, political surroundings are impacting them. And then you've got this consistent, I think as you said, like the Melchers always benefit.
Upper class, the people that are born into names, that name is obviously part of the English society, so you always see them as well off.
They're always going to succeed and be safe. Whereas you've got like Blackadder, whose situation wildly changes in each season because of
middle class.
Because of the era.
And he's always having to play up and play down to kind of make the best of his situation wherever he finds himself, and that is his
great
kind
watch.
of theme. Yeah.
That's what I think. The thing I really love about the show is it is so rooted in its knowledge of history. I think Ben Elton was a history grad.
Yes.
When he comes on, the jokes become so much more.
They do.
The expense of with the whole Prince Regent thing of pointing out that people were in dire straits during those times.
Yeah.
And yet you had this.
He was living in such excess.
Exactly, and you've got so
many
jokes
socks.
about. Exactly. And like. There's a brilliant bit where they're putting Baldrick forward for Dunny-on-the-Wold.
Oh, that's so good, that episode. I bloody love that episode.
He's doing the form. Blackadder's filling in the form, and he says something like, past criminal history, and Baldrick goes, none. And he's like, oh, come on, you're going to be an MP. I'll just put down sexual deviance and fraud. And it's just like...
It's still so true.
But at the time, I think that was like the Profumo affair was happening at that time and stuff. So it's so... rooted in knowledge of history, but also right up to the money. And
I was going to say that I think when we were thinking about what sets it apart, I think the obvious answer is, it's an amazing idea in terms of it has different historical time periods. But I actually think what really sets it apart is the fact that it finds the universal themes that transcend time and just use each time period as a lens through which to pick that out.
And it makes you wonder, like, I'd be fascinated to know what made them choose the time periods they did. Why Queen Elizabeth and not Henry VIII? Why World War One and not World War Two? Is there just something inherently more comical about one time period than another, or was it just like they picked it out of a hat? How did they choose?
Just saying, Brian Blessed would have made an amazing Henry VIII.
He would have been.
Oh my goodness, he would have been amazing. I think maybe it's just the topics they did in their history GCSE. Just throwing it out.
Definitely.
Write what you know, kids. Write what you know.
We were just talking about that. So Joe kind of covered on it. Because it's such an easy, there are so many options to do. So you could do, Tudors and Stuarts. You could do it up to even closer. So I think one of the things I was reading about the 5th season, where they've talked about it a lot since it finished. And you've had like special comic relief stuff. You've had the Millennium Dome thing, which I don't think we really need to talk about.
No, I think that was a mistake. Personally.
We'll discard it from the canon.
It's not canon, That's But the thing they were going to do a 60s one in the early 2000s.
Yes, they did talk about that. Yeah.
And it was all going to be like the rock and roll bands of London, and he was going to be, part of the aristocracy, but hard on his money and stuff. And as part of a band. And there's so much history to choose from. It could carry on, but what do you
want
guys
it
think?
to?
Yeah, do you think it would work as a either carry on going, or what Will and Grace did with, picking up with the same people, or as a total reboot?
Oh, I don't know what you think.
I would never want anyone to do those characters other than those actors. I would never want to recast that show. If they could... I mean, I don't know whether you've seen Upstart Crow, which is Ben Elton's...
Mitchell and Webber in it as well, aren't they?
It's, Webb and Mitchell. David Mitchell.
David Mitchell. And David Mitchell plays Shakespeare.
Oh.
And that is very Blackadder-like.
Yeah.
And it's actually really funny.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't say it has the exact... I wouldn't say it's on the same level as Blackadder, but... it is definitely
in that vein,
yeah. And it is. I've found it very funny, like watching it, and it does remind me a lot of Blackadder. So if you could get the same standard of writing again and those actors back, yes, I am on board for it.
I don't know, because I know what you're saying in terms of the fact that technically the premise could continue. I'm with you in that I wouldn't want to see any other actors try to. I was going to say if they rebooted it, with different actors, it would have to be different characters, because I just couldn't have someone else play Blackadder. That would be ridiculous.
Yeah.
But
or Baldrick.
I just call it Blackadder Junior.
I just think season 4 ending was so perfect.
Yeah,
that's true.
And I'm just like, I'm always the same with these TV shows. I'm like, if you finish on a high, like, just leave it. Some things are amazing as they are, and we don't need any more.
Yeah,
just move on.
Yeah. I think I'm in total. I think it's just a shame because it's such an exciting
concept.
Yeah, but I'm totally with you.
Like redo it, but with like. You don't call it Blackadder, and you have other characters. Yeah. Like, and you just move around time and just different way.
Like a franchise of it, sort of thing.
Comedy Doctor Who.
Exactly. Yeah.
But
I think also. Sorry, I was just thinking. I feel like those actors have all come on so far since then, and it benefited from the kind of naivety, the youthfulness of that show.
Yeah.
So I feel like even if those same actors came back on board, it wouldn't be the same show, because as they should have, they've all grown and developed completely differently. Yeah. And so...
It was funny what I was reading from this History of Blackadder book, which I do recommend anyone checking out. I mean, I'm not making commission on promoting it, but...
Use this code for a discount.
If you're interested in, like, the history of comedy. But all of those actors, obviously, they were just kind of starting their careers, and some of what the sort of influenced the dynamic of how the show came together was everyone's egos were so high. So Rowan had this like had this burgeoning, like he was like the most successful of the group, so everyone was like really jealous of him. Like even Richard Curtis, they talk about Richard Curtis originally wanted to get into stand-up, but very quickly going on after Rowan, like every gig or whatever, or before Rowan, he'd be like, well, I can't fucking compete with him, I'm gonna stick to behind the scenes, do you know what I mean? And obviously he's gone on to have a very successful career in his own right doing that. So it was probably the right decision. Right but like, it's funny when they talk about so Rick Mayall coming on to do Flash Heart and Rowan, they would constantly be like trying to one up each other, like out punch each other, and I think that elevated it, because they were just like. And I think it was like friendly competition. I don't think anyone really came to massive blows, but I think there was this kind of sense of wanting to prove themselves. And for themselves, but also against each other, for the world, against the Monty Python. Do you know what I mean? And that kind of just punched it up. Do you know what I mean?
It's just bringing something fresh, and I think because maybe the budget cuts, it's what we talked about earlier, the restraints. It feels like so the writing is obviously brilliant, and you can tell that by having that book of the scripts. I remember just reading it constantly, just because it's so easy to read. It just comes off the page. But then the little quirks, like you say with Flash Heart, I remember reading that he definitely brought a lot of the kind of craziness and the woofs and the stuff like that, you know. and then Melchett with the whole Stephen Fry always says that he played him as if he had the worst hemorrhoids ever, which is why he's always grunting and like all of those. And it's so wonderful to kind of think that it's that kind of, they're all working at such a level of just bringing something completely fresh and bringing something that we hadn't seen before.
But can you imagine that conversation? So Stephen Fry goes up to Richard Curtis and says, I've thought of this really cool character thing. I think it's really going to inform my performance. My character's got really bad hemorrhoids.
I think he'd have pissed himself laughing.
So funny.
You can imagine being in that position, be like, all right, Stephen, yeah, okay, I'll give that a
go. Totally. I think it's just, I just think they were all, like that dynamic just made it better. And I think you see that even in so the difference between season 1 and season 2's writing, when Ben Elton comes on and starts writing with Richard Curtis, because he's got someone to like bounce off of. Like they talk about their writing process in this book that I've been reading, but they talk about like we have to put like a, I don't know, like a jingle
that you wrote, right?
Yeah, it's my main research. But no, they talk about their writing process, and they talk about how they would often start in isolation, so they'd each write like a different scene each on their own, and then they'd come back, they'd swap, and then they'd just pull it apart. So like they'd be like, oh, take this out, put this joke in here, and like and swap again, and just like punch each other's jokes up. And that's what and then you can see that in the script.
And I swear I've seen like behind the scenes footage of like the cast reading the script in like a rehearsal thing.
They did a documentary
and they would and and then you'd get the cast being like, well, that's not a funny enough joke. What would be funnier would be this. So they're just pushing each other all the way. Like, and I think, like you say, that youth and ego is
fueled a lot of that.
Obviously, a comfortability with each other to... Is comfortability a word? Comfort with each other, to be able to be that honest and say that's not working, you know, and because they all wanted the best thing. As you say, like there's ego, but there's also, it's a real friendly competitive ego rather than a horrible atmosphere.
Totally. And again,
it's that bringing the one up and the kind of taking things to the next level. So whether it's the writing, whether you're saying it's Rick Mayall and Rowan Atkinson, I remember seeing, I can't remember if it's on DVD or on that documentary, but there's a scene where Stephen Fry is trying to get the court case in season 4.
Oh yeah.
And Hugh Laurie is just making faces behind the camera, like just making him laugh so much that they have to get Hugh Laurie to leave the set because it's just going to, because it's making Melcher even more extreme each time, and it's just pushing them to that level of like, I want to make that person laugh. I don't want to make the audience laugh. I want to make Rick Mayall piss himself laughing. And it's again, it brings something really, it brings an energy, I think.
Yeah, totally.
All of those scenes.
That maybe they wouldn't have today.
No, I think it was, you know, today, although they're all brilliant, obviously, and they've gone on to do amazing things, I think their mindset's in a different place professionally. Like they've kind of they don't have to prove anything anymore.
No.
So that hunger and that eagerness to like establish themselves isn't quite there. So it's more kind of, they're like, I've got this, it's fine. And that would bring a different vibe to it, I think.
Yeah.
And I can't see House MD, you know, kind of playing Prince Regent now.
No. That would be weird. Like, would he have an American accent?
But that's a perfect segue of, you're talking about today, so 2019.
Yeah.
Obviously part of your Ally McBeal, so Bygones Podcast, you look back with 2019 vision. How does this stand up in terms of that? How does Blackadder stand up in terms of, you know...
It's a funny question, because I think obviously you watch it and you realise a lot of the cultural references are very, you know, when they kind of make nods to kind of present day, it's obviously related to the 80s and the politics of the 80s. Yeah. That is dated, but that makes sense because that's when it was made.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of its values and morals and that kind of thing and ethics, I actually think it holds up pretty well.
Yeah.
Like, they never really punch down on people when they're making jokes. if they do anything like that, it's usually to take the piss out of people who are like that. So I'm thinking what comes to mind is there's a lot of francophobia that runs through the show.
Yeah.
So particularly the episode I'm thinking of in The Scarlet Pimpernel, when everyone's just really like anti-French people. That was accurate for the historical time period, so I think that works from that perspective. But B, I don't think they're saying like it's funny to make fun of French people. I think they're saying it's ridiculous. Xenophobia is ridiculous, and look at this, isn't this funny?
But also, I think it's, but at the same time, it's also playing into that centuries and centuries old rivalry between Britain and France. Because we have been rivals for centuries, and so we have our jokes about French people, and no doubt French people have their jokes about us. And it's playing into that as well. But I don't feel that those jokes are mean-spirited in a way that is ugly.
I think also it depends on the audience as well. Like that, like, you know, like how beauty's in the eye of the beholder and stuff. Comedy's kind of like in the ear of the beholder. If you think that that's funny, just as a joke about French people, okay, fine, that's weird, but sure, that's if you find that funny. But you know, or as you said, the other way of kind of actually looking at xenophobia is like ridiculous. So it just depends on which way you're seeing it. They're targeting a wide audience.
From the
I know where I sit there, but
but from the opening of most of the episodes, the satire is so front and center that you know that even if an audience is taking something, the writing seems to be, like you say, looking at things with maybe an 80s 90s politics, but because they're taking the piss out of Elizabethan traditions or Regency era traditions, or, you know, things that actually I find really interesting that they found comedy in, of the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of young men, and they somehow make jokes of it that are funny but also poignant, and it's poignant, it's so clever that and so I think I don't think it's dated in the way that something like Friends you look back at and they make stupid people look stupid.
Well, and also I'm also thinking of, because quite a big theme that comes out in our critique of Ally McBeal nearly every episode is there's this underlying vein that seemed to happen more often in the 90s, I think because there was this concept of 90s feminism that we sort of like to pick apart a little bit, in that there was this like, oh, we just have to act like the boys and that's the answer, which we're kind of not, we don't have that mindset these days. That seems to be a very prevalent theme in a lot of 90s shows. There's like this sort of undercurrent of institutionalized misogyny that they don't even realize they have. I don't see any of that in Blackadder, really.
That's because there's not a lot of women characters.
Well, you say that, but Queenie is
Queenie's amazing.
She's a massive, great example of like
one season.
No, but they do have. But Bob
and her nanny.
Bob is great.
Bob is an example of a strong woman.
And that's the other thing. Upstart Crow could be put into Blackadder canon because they have Bob come into an episode of Upstart Crow.
No.
And yet, as a woman called Bob, pretending to be a judge. Like she's a man, like she's a judge, and they have, and it's Bob. It's the same actress.
Isn't that interesting?
It's amazing.
That's
I love
brilliant.
that.
That's
but, like,
so cool.
When you think about, I know what you're saying, in that there isn't a massive amount of female representation in Blackadder, but when they do have women in it, I would say, for the most part, they're presented as strong sort of peers.
But
trying to make the best of their situation, much like Blackadder is.
Yeah.
And actually highlighting real, you know, so they highlighted a lot of the aspects of the difficulties of a female monarch. And with Bob coming back in season 4, they highlighted the difficulties of a nation struggling with sending off young men. And not you know, a lot of stuff is brought to the front. But they're just, you know, okay, you could say it's a product of its time, but it is a more male-led cast. But you're exactly right. No one is made. They don't ever have expense at someone because of their position or their, sexuality or something like that.
No,
it's actually quite interesting, because there's not that level of. So if some of the women are stupid, so Nursey is portrayed as very low intelligence, let's say.
Yes.
But it's not ever made fun of in the way that, because everyone's stupid. Melchett is stupid.
Yeah, Percy's ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But Baldric is, it doesn't stick out in that way. It's just another.
And
it's just
even
another
Blackadder
ridiculous character.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're
And
allowed
Blackadder
to
is
be as
stupid and-
ridiculous as the men.
Yeah. I like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a really good way of putting it.
Yeah.
And she gets to dress as a cow. I love my udders.
Nursey's brilliant. I love her. Yeah.
And you've got Miriam Margolyes, who is just wonderful as she. Like I keep forgetting she's in it, and then
Yeah.
Yeah.
because she's now just famous for being on Graham Norton all the time, and is wonderful.
Oh yeah,
I love Graham Norton.
Yeah, she was great on there. Graham Norton.
She's so funny.
She's really brilliant. Yeah, I love that she's that kind of slightly older generation of women who's just like, fuck it.
Yeah,
she's say what I want now.
I'm going to be as bonkers as I like.
I can wank off a soldier in a tree in Edinburgh.
Yeah, who knows? Who cares? Yeah.
I feel like we should probably apply to the BBC for rights for because we've quoted so much of the show. On that topic, do you have like a favourite scene or particular like piece of writing that you say like that is perfect? That's exactly what Blackadder is.
Oh my goodness.
There's so many examples.
Sorry.
I mean, I was saying to Laura Jane that I love the bit in season 3 with Miranda Richardson where she's being married off to Prince George, or they're attempting to arrange a marriage, and her father goes, I love her as much as any pig.
I'm not saying something.
That's it.
That's really funny. I don't know. I mean, like almost every line is like, oh my god, yeah.
But I love the way, like, it's not even, you can't even say it's writing, it is performance. Like, Rowan Atkinson can just say Bob, and I'm like cracking up. Like, he's so good.
Well, that actually came out of, that's his speech. He has not speech impediment, but he has a stutter.
Yes.
And he specifically struggles with the word B.
Really?
Yeah.
So the fact that it's Blackadder, Baldric, like they really did try and trip him up, because it really comes out. It is.
That's mean.
It really comes out. And because a lot of the humour in it is at people's expense, like a lot of the quotes are their put downs, aren't they? You know, a lot of what Blackadder says is something to put down Percy, something to put down. But then because he's almost struggling with the like Bob, like it's brilliant. Yeah, I love it. I agree with you there. But mine has to be darling.
Oh,
don't
just
darling.
The word.
That's one of my favourite bits, season 4.
And how many times it makes me laugh.
That's cute. And I think I like when we get a funny joke that is also heartfelt. So one of my favourite examples of that is in season 2 where he comes back. I forget what happens, but he comes back from some adventure, and the Queen says, "Oh, did you miss me, Edmund?" And he goes, "Madam, life without you was like a broken pencil. Pointless." And it's just like, it's hilarious, it's clever, because you're like, brilliant. Broken pencil, what the fuck? And then, but it's also like, oh, he really loves Queenie, that's so cute. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, yeah.
And then whenever Queenie is like, what is it? She says, she's like, oh, when he wants to marry Bob, and she's like, his hand nose as pretty as mine. Oh, good, because otherwise I don't have to cut it off. Imagine the mess.
She was great.
They managed to convey like so much humour there, but also a kind of semi-realistic attitude at the time of going like, I don't care about other people. Like, I will fucking perform them.
Yeah, off with the head.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
But I think it's testament just in this, like, how long we've been talking and the amount of times, even just hearing someone else say the line, I can picture it. I'm laughing.
Yes.
It's full on. It's a real belly laugh as well. It's not a titter. It's a kind of. It's such a well done show.
I feel like
I've never heard you say the word titter before.
Titter. I feel like it's one of those shows that every time I watch, no matter how many times I've seen it, I'm going to laugh out loud.
Yeah.
Like, and even though I know the joke's coming, it's still funny.
It's still good every time.
Still funny.
Yeah.
And there's not many shows you can say that about.
And like you say, with like today's like eyes on it, as it were. Like, I mean, last night we were watching the In-Betweeners movie, and there was it stands up still, like, but there was a moment where I was like, oh no, that you wouldn't write that today.
Yeah.
Like,
and that's only been about what, 10 years?
Not even that. Those kinds of moments when rewatching Blackadder.
We in Ally McBeal in Bygones, our podcast, when we come across those moments, we have a segment in our show where we each throw in an objection every episode.
We'll be like, objection.
Yeah, so those are usually the moments where we object to, and I can't object to anything in Ally McBeal. In Blackadder even. I can object to a lot in Ally McBeal, but not in Blackadder.
Yeah, in Blackadder, I can't remember, rewatching it in recent memory and like having that feeling of like wincing from the kind of like, oh no, that doesn't feel right anymore.
Right,
like that doesn't happen if at all in Blackadder.
Wow, I think that's probably a first.
I think that's what makes it a classic and why it's so timeless, right?
Well, yeah, but then you say that Fawlty Towers is seen as a classic, but that's definitely got moments where you
go,
No. So I don't know if it does. I think this stands out.
No, I'm making a new list of classics, and it's mine. It's my list, and it's official. Blackadder's on there. Yeah. Fawlty Towers is not allowed.
You're cancelled. No, not cancelled. Just slap wrist.
You could be rude to French people, but not Spanish waiters.
Yeah.
Such a British.
That's like the perfect way to end the podcast, right? Just leave it with that out hanging there. Wow. Yeah, is that going to be the last thing you say? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay, well, guys, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, we've loved it.
Yeah, it's been really fun.
I'm now going to go and find that book. Not the one you keep quoting, but...
It's available on Amazon. I think the Kindle edition is like a couple of quid, so yeah.
Nice.
Bargain.
Not on commission.
#ad. No, not really.
Okay, so where can our listeners find you online? Obviously, not in real life.
Yeah, so we're on, they can search for the podcast on all your usual podcatchers, on Apple Podcasts or Google Casts or whatever. Spotify. Yeah, just search for Bygones Podcast. We're the only Ally McBeal podcast.
Yeah.
But we're on Twitter at Bygones Podcast, and we're on Instagram at Bygones Pod. And we're on Facebook. You can search for Bygones Podcast there as well. So it's all pretty simple.
Yes.
Amazing. And we really thank you, not just for choosing one of our favourites. It's really fun to laugh, and I think we might start watching it again.
Yeah, I've just been thinking that. I'm like, I really want to watch it. Is it on Netflix? I think it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's all on Netflix and even the Millennium Dome one, but you can just press pause.
Skip that. Yeah. That one.
But a big thank you to Bygones Podcast, and a big thank you to all our listeners. If you like what you heard, please throw us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. We'll be back for more State of the Sitcom next time. Bye.
Bye.
I never know how to finish it.
we came up with saying bygones for precisely this reason. We were like, how do we finish it? We were like, bygones.
Brilliant.
We need something like that. But Judge well, but no,
that's not going to work. We'll just press the stop recording button. Hopefully this won't cut off the conversation. Is it still working?
Yeah, it's still there.
Can you still hear us?